Hello, and welcome to the first of our series, Off the Podium. So this is an opportunity where I get to interview and chat casually with members of the LaGrange Symphony Orchestra, some of our patrons, other leaders in the arts. And it's all very organic, really, so it's a great opportunity to get to know some of these individuals who bring us this wonderful music on the stage or make it possible for us to enjoy live music. And that is going to make a return, I guarantee it. But in the meantime, here's an opportunity, and I am thrilled to have my first guest, Tracy Woodard, who is our acting principal second violin, and has a wonderful history of not just bringing music to us all over the state and beyond, but also has some incredibly interesting and meaningful things that she does in her life outside of that. So welcome, Tracy.
It's good to be here.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining me. So, what I'm curious about, because, obviously I know you as, an incredibly wonderful kind of mature and professional musician, but what I'm curious about is how you got your start in music and kind of what brought you to the violin.
Well, my parents were musicians. My parents were church organists, and so my childhood was spent in church rehearsals and choirs and AGO meetings. AGO is the American Guild of Organists, so that was my childhood, and so it was normal to have the house full of musicians. I actually started on piano when I was 5 because keyboard parents, and then I couldn't get into that. And then I tried cello when I was a couple of years after that, and I went, eh. And then about a year after that, I saw a movie where the villain was playing the violin. He was actually playing Paganini Caprice number 16, and I went, And so, and I happened to be in a public school district that had a really, really strong orchestra program. And so I started that when I was in 6th grade. And then I think what really clinched it was that the same year that I started violin, when I was 10, I was in New York City, and I was in the train station, and I saw some Juilliard kid playing Vivaldi Four Seasons, and he clearly played it 1,000 times. He was like swinging and swaying and cracking jokes. And I was like, I want that as my job, right? That's just the joy that he brought to it. So I think from then on, it was like an easy sell for me to continue on with youth orchestra, and then as a performance major in college, and then making a career out of it.
Wonderful. That's such a great pathway and some terrific stories there. I think a lot of people start on keyboard because, although obviously that has its own deep intricacies, at least at the outset, you don't need to worry too much about playing in tune and all of the other things that one has to consider, certainly as a string player. So I think that's a great pathway. And I didn't realize you had an organist in the family. So yeah, that's very much a part of my own background as well. So terrific. So I know obviously that you play in multiple ensembles, and we'll come to that a little later in our discussion. But you also have a great reputation and a presence as a teacher. So why is teaching important to you?
Well, we need to be always mindful about building the next generation of artists, wherever we are in the world. So it is important that even if children don't go on to become professional musicians, it is part of the culture. You take your culture wherever you go. So I have a bunch of students right now, they're studying violin and viola. And if they grow up to become professional musicians, great. But if they grow up to become accountants and bakers and candlestick makers, they will still have that part of them that knows how to play music, and that is part of the culture that they will take with them when they grow up. So, again, it makes them a well-rounded person, and it gives them a source of joy. So many of my students, they grow up to college to do something else, and they still play in orchestras, or they play in chamber with the rest of their family members. And they're like, I love this. And I want them to be able to take them with them, even when they finish lessons with me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I thank you for everything that you bring to the lives of young people as well as our adult audiences as well. It's incredibly important that it gives that additional dimension, as you say. And I think for a lot of children, a lot of adults, it's a place where you can escape to. It's not your necessarily your day job, and it's not necessarily your other classes at school, but it's something that you can either own individually, or you can choose to participate in groups, be it a string quartet or an 80-person youth symphony. So very, very valuable attribute and asset, I think, in life. And it has to start somewhere. You're absolutely right.
Well, and I've actually gotten more private students during the COVID lockdown than any other time, because so many parents that I know, they themselves had played music like just on an amateur level, and they still kept all the instruments. And they're like, well, if we're all gonna be stuck at home and I'm now working from home, and a lot of adults, their job's like, oh, you can work from home now, you can just work from home forever. And so they are now like, well, I want my child to learn so that we can play with our children on instruments at home. So I think we're gonna see a renaissance of, honestly, of at home, like chamber music and this sort of Teutonic ideal of, like, you think about, did you ever read James Joyce's The Dead from the Dubliners?
I did not.
It's a beautiful short story, but it's all about this dinner party, and in the dinner party, there's a piano, and everybody, like half the people in this party can play piano or they can sing songs, and everyone's like, let's just play some music, and it's just so joyful. And I feel that because more and more families are stuck at home and are looking for like these wholesome activities they can do as a family, we're going to see more of that. And again, it's like, we're not professionals, that's okay. This is something we can do as a family that is low pressure and enjoyable, and it's just like a few minutes at the end of a hard day, sort of an activity, if that makes sense. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the home.
That's fascinating. I hadn't thought of that. And just as you started to describe it, you were Prometheus to my verbiage, which was, it sounds like a renaissance is coming here. And that would actually be a wonderful outcome of these obviously very difficult situations. I mean, kind of a return to the real character, in fact, of chamber music and family music. I mean, chamber music is chamber music because you played it in a chamber, i.e. somebody's house, as opposed to necessarily a huge concert hall. So yeah, no, it's a great thought. So, obviously, as well as all of the great orchestral and chamber music that you do bring to kind of local and regional audiences, something that as a composer I particularly appreciate with your professional life is that you certainly give a great voice to new music as well. And so I was wondering from your perspective as somebody, you're a musician who brings those ideas and those concepts to life for us as living composers, what is important to you, or what is special to you about the place of new music in today?
Well, what I love about a lot of new music today is the internet has allowed a wider variety and a wider acceptance of different what is called new music. When I was an undergraduate student, if it didn't sound like Ligeti, it wasn't new music. And now it has become acceptable. It's like, no, maybe I'm getting my influence from Egyptian pop, or from tango, or from blues, or from Ghana drum music, fill in the blank. And the democratization of social media, where someone can set up their own music channel on YouTube or Instagram and saying, like, I've written this thing, I'm going to perform it for you right now and build my own audience, means you can have these niche genres within new music, so that you are not beholden to the conservatory model, which was a much more vertical hierarchy, right? And so, like, I did a call for scores a couple of weeks ago for my string quartet, and I said, hey, we're programming 2 new music shows, and it's just going to be video streamed in October and November. Who's got a string quartet? And I got 40 submissions in 2 days, and most of them it was just a wide variety of sounds. I mean, some of them were like sort of like 70s pointillist. Some of them were very much like based on Irish reels. Some of them sounded like dial tones, which is fine. But I feel like we're allowing a greater variety of sounds, especially for strings. It used to be like you could only get a really cool variety if you were a keyboard player, but I think that because also more people are becoming composers. I felt like there's this sort of barrier that you could only become a composer if you worked with like one of these 10 famous music schools. And now a lot of people are like, you know what? I went to college. I should know how to learn things. And if I can learn this instrument, I can learn how to take notes and write it down and publish it and have it performed. So again, I think that thanks to the internet where you can build your own audience and have that platform, more people are sort of braving that and saying, yeah, I'm just going to create my own thing now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think that's a fabulous answer. I mean, just the perception of what is new music now. And so the automatic default position of, well, I don't like new music. It's like, well, do you know, how can you possibly say that? Because the diversity of new music is so broad, and I think a lot of it is absolutely attributable to what you said, which is this massive cross-fertilization of styles, where people are aware of so many different more sort of musical styles, and they can kind of borrow those or incorporate those into their own voice. And I think another fascinating thing with composers now is that you have a lot more than one voice. And you can write music that sounds kind of one way, and then write the diametrical opposite and incorporate that into your own creative output, which I think is another kind of spin on the multiplicity of style and stylistic diversity that we're seeing. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, technology has permissioned so much of this in terms of you being able to sort of put up your own site, or even the tools, I think, in terms of creating the sounds and having somewhat realistic playback, kind of on the software, kind of gives you a very different entrance. You don't have to go, although if you did go to Juilliard and you're watching, that's an incredible experience, but you don't have to have gone through one of those conservatory or big music school pathways to have a relevant voice. And the other part of the equation, of course, is that there is no substitute for you taking your work off of the written page and making it come alive in the hands of musicians. Where I think for me as a composer, I have learned more working with real musicians and ensembles playing my music than I did in any classroom. Because, I mean, either from the holistic side of things, or, the bassoonist will come up and say, hey, that note isn't really on the bassoon, right? So, I mean, those things are always very useful. So fantastic. So what I wanted to get to next was, outside of this, incredibly rich, diverse engagement that you have with music in your life, there's this whole other side to you, which I think is, at least equally as important, and to me, just profoundly impressive. I'm sort of stuck in my own little music world and some other things here, but the reach of what you're doing is quite profound. And obviously I'm talking about your work with In-Town Collaborative Ministries and Mad Houses. And I'd love for you to tell our audience a little bit about kind of what those things are.
So I'll start with Mad Housers since I've been with them longer. Mad Housers is an Atlanta-based nonprofit. It started in the 80s back at Georgia Tech School of Architecture. And what they do is we build small, modular, inexpensive shelters for homeless adults, and we give them away for free. I started with them back in 1999. I'm now president, and we've built hundreds of them all over Atlanta. We have built them in New York City, in Switzerland, the one in Milan was hilarious because we had to switch to metric and they made everything out of like polished maple. Yeah, the idea is that the blueprints are meant to be simple, and that, Boy Scouts can slap them together. And the idea is that it is not meant to be permanent, but it is meant to be sort of a stopgap shelter, something that locks, something that where the person feels they can sleep safely, store their belongings during the day while they, save up their money to get a more permanent housing solution, and just have some place where they can sleep. I mean, the hardest thing about sleeping outside in the streets is if you're outside, everything is a threat. You don't know who's going to try and rob you. You're getting rained on. There's dogs, there's insects, and you kind of lose your mind. So that's Mad Housers. We build little sheds for homeless people. And then the In-Town Collaborative Ministries is another nonprofit here in Atlanta. And they hired me as team lead case manager about 1.5 years ago. And what we do is we do the next step in the process, where we find people who've been on the streets and have some kind of medical diagnosis, and we hook them into permanent supportive housing. And that is literally free housing. Like, here's an apartment, you can stay here for the rest of your life, you never have to pay rent, and here's some social services, and good luck. And the thing is, that doesn't solve everything that this person might be dealing with, but once you're housed, you can now move on to better problems. And one of the things that's been helpful during COVID is we've gotten a lot of money. We got like $20 million to hire more social workers, to get more housing, to get other wraparound benefits for our clients. And so we've been able to house hundreds of people. And these are the most vulnerable. This isn't just, yes, we're starting to get more and more people who've just recently been affected by COVID. Like, I've never been homeless before. I lost my job. I've burned through my savings. I've been in a tent for the last 2 months. Most of the people we're working with are deeply, deeply damaged. These are people who are schizophrenic in the woods for 30 years, right? These are the people who are not going to be able to help themselves. They need hand-holding. And so these are my clients. And it has obviously kept us very busy. And also dealing with the Kafkaesque bureaucracy that is working with any government agency is going to be a challenge. But obviously there's a need, and we've been able to get a lot of financial support for it. So that's been amazing.
That's just an incredible mission. I mean, both of those organizations. I mean, obviously, homelessness is just an incredible problem, globally, for sure. And I mean, just the interoperability of being able to take the plans and sort of export those to any country and be able to construct those shelters, and then the direct outreach that you have through In-Town Collaborative Ministries is just vital. And I just think such an incredible thing to be addressing those problems outside of clearly a framework or a structure that is not able to do that from kind of a central source, either regional or federal government. So if we wanted to find out more about either of those organizations, or maybe you could suggest where we could go to see that, and are there any particular needs or ways that those of us sort of sitting in a house watching this, what are the ways that we could help support those missions if we were so inclined?
This is going to sound silly. We need shoes. Because with COVID, a lot of the clothing closets, because of health concerns, have had to close down. And most of my clients are really tall men, like size 13 shoes. I've had several friends who are also tall men send me size 13 shoes, just because, when you're homeless, you walk everywhere. So we need men's shoes. We also need protein, because a lot of our guys, again, they're big and tall, and they have jobs, but they're hard, they're like construction. And so, when we have food donations, people are like, oh, we will send you salad and apples and potatoes. I was like, what we need Spam. We need canned tuna, So food pantry donations, clothing closet donations would be extremely helpful, just because, again, because of COVID, food pantries and clothing closets have necessarily had to close. And so we are sort of filling that need. So the two websites, so for the food and clothing, I would go to the In-Town website. That is spelled intowncm.org. So it's I, N as in Nancy, T-O-W, N as in Nancy, C, M as in Mary.org. And there's a food pantry website. And not only can you donate food, but you could also volunteer and put spam in a bag. And then for Mad Housers, one of the things that we've been doing over the summer, because we haven't been having proper volunteer events, again, due to COVID. So what volunteers have been doing is downloading the blueprints and building it with their kids. So we had several families download the blueprints, their kids would nail it together, and then we would come with a truck, take the panels, and deploy it into the field for our clients. So if you would like to build one, you can go to the website madhousers.org, and there's SketchUp models, there's instructions for everything. It's pretty straightforward.
All right, that's tremendous. What we'll also try and do is put those websites alongside in a little box on our website as well. But so, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it. So we need shoes, and we need protein, and we need you to download the plans and consider help building one of these incredibly valuable shelters. Yeah, I mean, the vulnerability, I just can't imagine. I mean, I went camping as a kid and, was slightly perturbed that, yes, you're outdoors and there are no real solid walls necessarily. And yeah, I mean, I just can't even imagine what that must be like. And so, again, for that extraordinary work that you do, we certainly thank you for sure. So we will try and get those links up or give some guidance to folks who have listened in and will listen in to our podcast. But Tracy, you and I have walked on and off stages for years now, and I have to say I knew some of this, but having the pleasure of having you come on and talk about this has certainly shown me a lot, and I'm sure has shown our audience a lot. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is, as they say, a wrap for our first show of Off the Podium. Tracy Woodard, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for being our guest on this first show. And I can't wait to walk back onto one of those stages with you in the near future. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Tracy.
Thank you for having me.